Hey everyone, this is Kevin from thechesswebsite.com, and today we're going to be going over the Danish Bird trap. Now, this derives from the Danish Gambit, one of my favorite chess openings with e4, e5, and then after d4 and the pawn takes, white says, we're not done giving up material. Let's go ahead and play pawn to c3. Hey, black, if you want to keep gobbling up material, that's fine with me. And black many times will just continue to gobble up material. Pawn takes here on c3, bishop to c4. Black says, yeah, let's just keep gobbling out material here on b2. And then after the bishop takes, you can see white has taken one pawn. Black has taken three pawns. So black is up 2 pawns in material, but white does have a very strong attack already. You can see the queen is completely open to attack. Both the bishops are eyeing down on the king side of the board for a very strong attack. And from black's standpoint, none of the material left on the board has moved at all. Just that one single pawn started here on e7 did all the movement so far from black. So yes, black is up, but it is very difficult to play in this position from black. Now, many times if they're not familiar with how to do this, because there's lots of ways that black can continue here, is they may try to start an attack. And one of the most common ways in chess to look for an attack is as soon as a bishop moves, especially from white's standpoint, to always look at the g2 pawn and the b2 pawn. You can see this g2 pawn, once this light square bishop moves away, it is undefended since it's only protected by the bishop early on. So queen to g5 definitely makes some sense to get the queen, the most powerful piece on the board, get it involved into the game, attack this pawn here on g2. Black may be thinking, hey, I'm already up 2 pawns in material. As long as I don't screw this up, I should have a pretty easy game here. So let's go ahead and get my most important piece involved into the game, attacking this pawn. Now, white really should not be thinking about losing this pawn right here. Instead, should only be thinking about getting more material involved into the game. That's the whole point of the Danish Gambit, is to get as much material involved into the game. So that should include knight to f3. And this is really where the trap comes from. Now, this was played many years ago by Henry Bird. He was playing against Lasker. And so we'll go over his specific variation in this trap. But I'm going to go over lots of different things that you could encounter if they fall for it completely and play incorrectly. We'll show you that, as well as if they don't completely mess it up, how you can still capitalize and have a very good game. So if they play queen to g5, many times they're looking to capture this pawn here on g2. Now that would be a mistake here, but it's tough to see right away how that is a mistake. But after queen takes on g2, then white's going to play rook to g1. Now this queen, you can see, doesn't have a lot of options. Can't take the rook here on g1 or the pawn here on h2. Both of those are protected by this knight here on f3. Can't take the knight. It's protected by the queen here on g1. Can't move along this g file. It is being attacked by this rook here. So the only safe square is queen to h3. Now, if black's really looking at this and says, man, I don't just want to retreat right away. Let's go ahead and get an in-between move and attack my opponent with the only other piece that I can get involved into the action right now, and that is the bishop. So bishop down to b4, check. But luckily for whites, they can just play king to e2. Now, they don't want to play something like knight to c3 because that does stop the attack from this dark square bishop here on b2, eyeing down this long dark square diagonal. But it doesn't really matter if the king comes here to e2. Yes, you have lost the right to castle, but that doesn't matter. You're not really going to be castling on the king side because the rook's already moved, and you don't want to castle on the queen side because you've already given up all the pawns in front of that. So it doesn't really matter too much as far as where your king is at. It all matters where your pieces are on the board for you to attack your opponent. Now, from black's standpoint, how do they continue? They don't have any other attacks to check the king. And so now it comes down to, okay, now they have to play queen to h3 or they're going to lose their queen. And from here, white can start the attack with the first move being bishop takes here on f7. I'll go through all the iterations of where the black king could go, but let's start with just the king takes here on f7 because that's the most obvious. Knight to g5, forking the king. This is check. And then after the king moves, then the queen is going to fall here on h3. f3. If we come back going clockwise instead of the king taking here on f7, if king to e7, then rook takes here on g7. This long dark square diagonal still being attacked by the bishop here on b2, and really this is threatening the move bishop to e6, and the king can't just take here on e6 because you still have that knight to g5 that would again fork the king here on e6 and capture this queen. So if you start to look at, okay, the bishop comes here to e6, that's a discovered attack with the rook. That's really going to be attacking this queen once the bishop moves, and so the queen is almost under attack by the move with rook takes here on g7. So how does the queen really get out of this? It can't move along this light square diagonal, can't come here to g4, just fall to the rook. Can't come here to f5, fall to the pawn. Can't come here to e6, fall to the bishop here. Can't come to h4, and you can see that just queen to h5 has it's just going to lose immediately to the bishop here on f7. So the only option for black to hold on to the queen is to play queen to h6. But then white can take here on g8 after the queen takes, because it looks pretty bad. This is check right here. So if the queen does not take, maybe king to d8, well, then all of a sudden just rook down here to g3, and black has just nothing else left to do here. The rook can't take because it's just going to fall to this rook taking it on g8. But then if you say, well, if it doesn't take, then it's just going to fall in the next move with bishop takes here on h8. There's no strong attack that black has. All this material here on the queen side of the board can't move anywhere. So that just looks pretty awkward. But if they do take, let's say bishop takes on g8, if the queen takes here on g7, then the queen is just going to fall. So none of those options are going to go well for black. So after the queen to h6, which is really the only good move, that just doesn't lose the queen automatically, black is still going to end up losing. So if we come back, instead of king to e7, which you already know is going to lose, maybe instead they play king to d8. And this is when Bird actually played this, which the move we're going over is the Danish Bird trap. He actually played the move bishop takes here on g7. So both the bishops up here just cutting off every single square that black could really go to, attacking this rook right here on h8. And then Lasker played the move knight to e7, just saying, okay, yeah, I'm going to lose this rook here. There's nothing I can do about that. Let's go and get my knight involved into the game. But this loses because knight to g5, attacking the queen. There's no real good squares for the queen to go to. The queen came here to h4. And then there is a smothered mate here with knight to e6, being smothered by the pawn, and the pawn is being pinned down by the queen here on d1. So it can't really move anywhere, and it can't come here to e8 because it is being attacked by this bishop here on f7. So that is the checkmate in that particular game. That's where we get the name from the Danish Bird trap, but doesn't have to play the knight to e7. There's just no other good squares for black to really go to because the rook's going to fall here on h8. Then you can get your queen involved into the game. You can attack the queen here on h3. Just lots of different options. So we've looked at some of the moves, and the last move from black's standpoint is they could play king to f8. Same situation as if they played king to d8. This is just more awkward for black because bishop takes here on g7, check, and the bishop here on g7 is protected by the rook. Now remember, anytime they take that bishop here on f7, just going to fork them, knight to g5 check, and then take their queen here on h3. So this just gets even worse for black. And so from here, doesn't really matter where they go. We're going to capture this material here on h8 unless they want to give up their queen. That is another option. So that's what happens if they completely fall for the trap. If we come back and say, okay, what if after this rook to g1, they don't play bishop to b4? Because we already looked at, okay, the bishop here on f8, that just leaves open. If that bishop moves, then the pawn here on g7 falls pretty easily. So what if the bishop doesn't move? Because the king coming here to e2 is not a significant weakness for white. So black in this case is going to automatically just bring the queen to h3, recognize their mistake, not get into any more trouble with bishop here to b4. But in this spot, it's still pretty bad for black. So bishop takes here on f7. We know they can't take, so that's definitely not going to work. King to d8, probably their best option here. But now we can play rook takes here on g7. Now, as soon as this rook moves, it's going to be a open, long, dark square diagonal to take this rook here on h8. So we're normally going to see the bishop take, and then the bishop take here on g7, attacking the rook. And this is where there's not a lot of great options here. You could play something like d6. Okay, well, just trying to open up the door for the light square bishop to get involved, but then the bishop just takes here on h8. That doesn't feel really good. They could always get their queen, so maybe queen to g4, and then after we take here on h8, which they cannot stop, then they take here on e4, check, but then queen to e2, attacking the queen, says, yeah, if you want to trade off, that's fine. We're just up so much material, and also if they move their queen, they have to be cautious because queen to e8 would be checkmate if they move their queen to the wrong spot. So in many cases, they almost have to take here, but after the king takes, you can see they're in a pretty tough spot. They need to move their knight. They don't want to move it to f6 because that would just fall to the bishop here on h8. So they're looking at knight to e7 and then knight to c3. But if you look at the material, white is up a minor piece and a rook. That's not going to be good. They have a pass pawn here on the f-file. There's no way black should even be in this game, and white should have a pretty easy endgame from here. So that is the Danish bird trap with the few variations that you could potentially see if they don't fall for it completely. Either way, white's definitely going to have a good game. So if your opponent ever plays queen to g5 in the Danish Gambit, you should your eyes should light up and just hope that after you played knight to f3, that they come down and take here and take the bait for the trap here on g2. Hopefully, guys enjoyed this video. Thanks for all the support of the channel. If you have any suggestions for future videos, please let me know in the comments below, or you can always email me as well at thechesswebsite@gmail.com. But thanks so much, and I'll see you guys in the next video.